Alrighty, what's going on, guys? We're Gaming here, back with another video. Today's episode, we're going to be doing a tier list for Mythic Plus in Midnight, looking at patch 12.05 and just kind of where I think most of the specs are at the moment. This is going to be a DPS only tier list. We're not looking at tanks or healers. In this specific list, we'll do a list for those here in a bit. For now, keeping it at DPS. So, going to go ahead and get started here. We'll start off with Warlock. We'll just kind of go left to right here. So Affliction Warlock started out just even before the initial release of Midnight. Affliction Warlock was actually really strong, and they ended up actually getting nerfed. The new play style with Seed of Corruption on Affliction, in my opinion, is super fun. And I really don't think that Affliction is necessarily a bad spec to play. The problem that it has is it competes with Demonology Warlock. And just Warlock in general has really good utility through their curses. But I don't believe, personally, that Affliction Warlock brings quite the damage profile to Mythic Plus that you're really after. One of the things that Demonology does really good is it has such high single target and funnel priority damage that Affliction does not bring. And you can actually bring a lot of other specs that do what Affliction is trying to do, that just simply do it better. And you know, like we said earlier, unfortunately for Affliction, is really strong in the beta. It got nerfed, and in 12.05 it did not receive any other changes. So for that reason, we will go ahead and put it. It's not necessarily bad or anything in any way. The playstyle is definitely better than it was prior, or I guess in prior expansion seasons, but the damage and the damage profile just really isn't there to fit a lot of comps right now. And next we have our Arcane Mage. So Arcane Mage is not super popular right now, but of course they do bring, you know, Time Warp to the group. And Arcane Mage has been popular in the past for a lot of the reasons that Demo Lock is popular right now is because it brings that funnel damage. And unfortunately for Arcane Mage, they did receive a small nerf with the way that their arcane pulse charges work. So the base cast time was increased from 1.7 seconds to 2.2 seconds, but at max stacks, or excuse me, at max charges, you get a 32% reduction in arcane pulse's cast time, which comes out to like 1.5 seconds. So it's actually faster than the old 1.7 seconds of casting it, but only at max stacks, which means it kind of hurts your burst, and now you become a little bit more ramp dependent. And actually for Arcane Mage, the issue with Arcane Mage is not necessarily its damage profile. It does really good damage on paper. It's just survivability. It does not have the best defensive tools. And this is also, they have this pretty much the same issue as Fire as well. They just don't have as good of a defensive toolkit as they've had in past expansions. So for that reason, we will put them in a B tier. The damage is there, but the defensive profile is not. Now we also have Arms Warrior. So Arms Warrior is actually pretty strong because we're running a Brewmaster tank, right? Monks bring more physical damage to the comp. It's actually a spec that was really bad in the beta. It was D tier and it's been buffed several times. It's moved all the way up to A tier now. So Arms Warrior actually did receive some buffs in 12.05. So Practice Strikes got a buff and now increases our Mortal Strike damage and Slam damage by 15% and Cleave and Whirlwind damage by 15%. That's specific to the Colossus tree. We had our Demolish radius increase from 8 to 10 yards, and the Dominance of the Colossus had its cooldown reduction from 2 seconds to 5 seconds at cap, which means you'll be able to demolish way more often. The Slayer tree also got some buffs. So Reap the Storm was reworked. It now procs off Cleave hitting 3+ targets, and when that procs, you'll unleash a flurry of steel doing a whole bunch of AoE damage, and Unrelenting Onslaught now increases damage dealt by Bladestorm by 20%. So really big buffs to Arms Warrior. So yeah, overall, Arms Warrior will be at the top of A tier. Now next we have Assassination Rogue. So Assassination Rogue is pretty similar to how it's been in past expansions. You're going to have your Caustic Spatter, and you're going to Rupture for energy. I'm not putting it in this tier, I'm just kind of putting it up here right now. So Assassination Rogue did actually get some buffs. The Assassination Rogue in general, your death mark can continue after a kill. It will just kind of continue rolling to the next target. So that was a buff. Deathstalker got a buff as well. So they got more damage tied to combo point spenders and just better mark control in general. And then Trickster got a buff as well, giving them a little bit stronger burst windows with a stacking effect applied. And that's applied to your cloud cover. So overall, no real downside in 12.05. The problem with Assassination Rogue is just their damage profile is just not... It's more of a funnel sort of play style, but their damage is just not as high as some of the other specs, and their utility really isn't there either. It's kind of a rogue thing. You know, they do have Shroud of Concealment, not really used all that much. It can be useful, And their Atrophic Poison is pretty useful as well, reducing enemy damage by 3%. So for those reasons, they'll go into A tier, but we're going to put them on the lower end of A tier. Okay, up next we have Augmentation, pretty much the only support class in World of Warcraft. Augmentation has been in kind of a weird spot in past expansions. It's either strong or nobody, like even if it's strong, not a lot of people play it. And then if it's weak, it's just like not even a spec in the game pretty much. So I think Blizzard is still trying to figure out how to make this class like work without it being absolutely bonkers. But it is currently in a state where it is absolutely insane right now. This will be our first spec that will go into S tier. So before this patch, it was actually A tier, and they got even more buffs in 1205, which pushes them up to S tier. Inferno's Blessing. So Inferno's Blessing, the Mighty Inferno buff, got a 40% damage and longer uptime via even might extensions. They had a fix as well with Inferno's Blessing targeting. It was actually targeting pets, so that was fixed. There's a Living Flame buff. It's got faster cast time and higher non-instant damage and healing. And then it did have a couple minor nerfs in there as well. But overall, they did get buffed. The problem with running Augmentation is if you do lose a DPS on a boss fight, you're pretty much screwed, because now instead of him buffing, it's basically like losing a DPS and a half if you're going to have a battle res. So that's kind of the downside of playing one. But yeah, Augmentation Evoker is really strong. It's our first S tier. Okay, moving on to Beast Mastery Hunter. So BM Hunter right now is probably the most popular Mythic Plus Hunter spec. You know, overall, Hunter's not in the best spot right now, just kind of across the board. And BM did not get any changes going into 1205. And really the main thing that Hunters have going for them in terms of group utility is the lust that they provide. Outside of that, they do bring some other things. But, you know, when you compare that to something like an Augmentation Evoker or something like a Shaman, all the utility that they bring, they just don't bring that much, really. Now, on the flip side of that, Hunters in general do have very good defensives. Their defenses have been buffed a lot over the past few seasons. You know, they got 2 charges of Survival of the Fittest. They have Exhilaration, and they also got Aspect of the Turtle. So there's not too much to say about Beast Mastery. I mean, overall, it's a pretty consistent performer. It's the best of the Hunter specs right now. There are a lot of movement effects in dungeons at the moment. In BM, you know, they don't have to stand to cast like Marksmanship. So they do have that going for them. I would probably put this somewhere in high B to low A. We'll just put them in low A for now. I would say, to be honest, BM is just a very consistent spec. From group to group that you play with, you're going to perform well playing BM. It's just very easy to play, straightforward, great for beginners. Okay, and next we have our Feral Druid. So Feral Druid's in an interesting spot right now. And Feral Druid actually did get some buffs coming into 1205. So lower ranks of Unseen Predator did get a slight nerf, but higher ranks of Unseen Predator, rank 2 and 3, got buffs. Just depending on, you know, how many combo points you put into it. They're trying to make sure that you're using that at max combo points. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Unseen Predator is tied to your Ferocious Bite. That's where that combo point spending thing comes in. And then also buffs to Unseen Slash and Unseen Swipe's base damage. Now, Feral Druid is going to be right up there with your Arms Warrior. So if you are running the physical damage comp, right, that kind of synergizes with Brewmaster Monk, you'll be running Arms Warrior. You could also run something like a Feral Druid. They're both going to be up there at the tippity top of the physical damage compositions. So yeah, not too much more to say about Feral Druid. Let's go ahead and talk really quick about Moonkin. So Moonkin is one of those specs that has also received some buffs this patch. So your Meteorites, which proc from Starfall, long story short, they proc more often now, but their projectile damage is reduced by 30%. And this is actually a pretty big damage bump for them, and it's actually bumped them up from A tier to the high end. Probably put them in like A+ tier if we had that. So we'll probably put them right here for now. And Balanced Druid started out in Midnight being pretty weak, and it's just like Arms Warrior, it's just gotten buffs and buffs, and it's actually really pushed itself up recently, up to the high end of A tier. You know, and Druid just in general is crazy strong, right? You get Mark, you get Solar Beam, you get so much crowd control. They are a little bit harder to play on the defensive side because you have to be comfortable shifting into bear form to be able to soak mechanic. The only problem that Moonkin has is Resto Druid is so strong right now, you'd be running double Druid. So something to kind of keep in mind, anytime Resto Druid is strong, it kind of dwarfs the other Druid specs. So, you know, if you're not running Resto Druid, Moonkin's going to be at the top of A tier. Okay, up next we have Devourer Demon Hunter. So Devourer Demon Hunter has been strong pretty much the entirety of Midnight. It's never been weak. We see that all the time with Blizzard. You know, they'll introduce a new spec or whatever, and it's just like bonkers broken. Now, this spec does a ton of damage, does some of the highest DPS in the game right now. It is kind of hard to play though, because it's very reliant on Void Metamorphosis. But they have really good single target, really good funnel, really good AoE. Just across the board, their damage profile is great. And they also bring Chaos Brand. So Chaos Brand is basically the opposite of what Brewmaster Monk brings, and that's going to be that magic damage buff. So if you're running a Spellcaster comp, you probably want to have Devourer Demon Hunter in the group somewhere. Overall, in 1205, they did get some more buffs. They got some nerfs as well, but I think overall it was a net buff. Their Feast of Souls buff no longer caps on stacks, and I think most of the buffs that they actually got was more kind of tuned towards survivability. I think their damage will be pretty similar to what we've seen. I don't think their damage is changing too much overall, but they did get some pretty noticeable survivability buffs. So we're going to put them up there in S tier along with Augmentation Evoker, probably just below Augmentation, but right behind it. Up next, we have Demonology Warlock. So Demonology Warlock, from a damage profile perspective, they didn't really get too much in 1205. They had a bug fix that should give them some more damage, and they had Fel Ravager got changed. Basically, your Fel Ravager will purge a beneficial magic effect from an enemy every 20 seconds. Just kind of AI things going on. Demonology is actually really strong. Probably like the highest of S tier at the start of Midnight. It did receive some tuning or whatever before 1205, and I think it's still S tier, but I think it's at the bottom of S tier. Still super strong. I think Warlock's utility actually has improved in Midnight due to the AoE curses that were kind of introduced to Warlock. And I think that their damage profile is really strong across the board, really good funnels, single target, and AoE. And, you know, just has really good synergy. These three are going to have really good synergy with each other. Okay, next we have Destruction Warlock. So Destruction Warlock is, you know, they're in a very similar spot, I would say, to something like Affliction Warlock. They're both just dwarfed by Demonology right now. They did receive some changes to their Conflagration of Chaos. Looks like an overall small damage buff to me, but nothing really changed, to be honest. Nothing considerable changed in 1205 for Destruction Warlock. So we'll just kind of throw them up here in like B tier, you know, somewhere pretty similar to Afflock. You can see more value from a Destruction Warlock in higher keys, where people can kind of stand in your Rain of Fire. And you can really get those soul shards and those soul fragments to just really generate quickly. It's very much a generator and spender spec. So if you liked playing Destruction Warlock in the War Within, it's still got a very similar play style now in Midnight. So put them in B tier. Moving on now, let's go to Devastation Evoker. So Devastation did not get any changes in 1205, at least changes specific to Devastation Evoker. There were some just general Evoker changes. So Devastation Evoker has a lot of burst damage. And the problem that Devastation Evoker has right now is really their damage is just behind all these other specs. They do really good cleave damage. 1 to 3 targets is really good. Their funnel is pretty good. So they do have a pretty decent damage profile if you need some funnel damage. They also have really good utility. They have lots of CC. They have Zephyr. They have Lust. They get all sorts of dispels. And all that being said, it's honestly, in my opinion, the easiest caster in the game to play. But it is being dwarfed by, unfortunately, Augmentation Evoker again. But if you do play this spec outside of those burst windows, you will struggle a little bit in sustained damage. So for that reason, we're going to put them either at the bottom of B tier or just, I guess you could say, the top end of C tier. We'll go ahead and put them just in C tier for now. We'll say C tier for high-end keys, and we'll say B tier for low-end keys due to their burst damage. So I changed my mind. Let's just kind of keep them in low-end B tier for now. So Elemental Shaman is another spec that did not get any changes in 1205. And Elemental Shaman actually got a really big rework coming into Midnight. You know, they ended up removing Ice Fury. There was a nerf to Echoes of the Great Sundering, which I personally like because I hated having to follow up an Earthquake after an Earthshock. Just felt awkward to me for some reason. You're going to be doing most of your damage inside of Ascendant's Burst window. And I believe they're running Stormbringer at the moment. So they're really good in dungeons and like Algathar, for example, that very first pull. They have good AoE. They also have really good single target damage. On the downside, though, Shaman just kind of in general did get some utility pulled away from them coming into Midnight. And they don't really have the best survivability options either. You have like Astral Shift. That's something I think that Shaman has just kind of historically struggled with, is their defensive capabilities. But if you're playing from a pure damage perspective, I think the Elemental Shaman is pretty strong right now. I'd probably put them in a similar spot to Moonkin, so you could interchange either, these two are interchangeable any way you want to look at it. For example, if you're running like a Resto Druid, you might prioritize an Elemental Shaman over Balance. If it's the other way around, you'd probably prioritize Balance for its better utility. Yeah, so no changes really to Elemental Shaman. They kind of remain in their A tier. Up next, we have Enhancement Shaman, which should get some small buffs as well. They got some buffs to their Healing Surge. This is going to be driven by a stacking effect that you can then consume and get really strong Healing Surges or Chain Heals out of. But from a damage perspective, nothing really changed here for Enhancement Shaman. Obviously, their utility is going to be very similar to like what we just talked about with Elemental Shaman. Earlier in the season, they really struggled with single target damage, but they did really good AoE damage. I believe back in March with some of the tuning they did, this did get a bump. So now they do pretty decent single target damage as well. Enhancement Shaman does not have the button bloat that it used to have back in the War Within. They did get a rework, and most of your focus is put into your Crash Lightning. So good funnel damage, good AoE, and then pretty mid single target damage. We'll put them in B tier, either right above or right below Affliction. We'll just put them right above Affliction, with these three being somewhat interchangeable. Okay, up next we have Frost Deathknight. So Frostwind's Fury has been taken off the GCD. And then Deathbringer did get some buffs as well to Reaper's Mark and Exterminate. So Frost Deathknight's going to be one of those specs that I would say is at the top end of B tier. I'd say it's better than these three here. And a lot of the reason for that is because of how durable the spec is. Now, Warlock is pretty durable as well, but Frost Deathknight having access to Deathstrike just, in my opinion, takes them just a little bit above Warlock in terms of survivability. They also have, Anti-Magic Zone, Anti-Magic Shell. I just think that Deathknight is probably the most durable DPS spec. Maybe not the most durable, but it is top 3 most durable DPS specs in the game, in my opinion. And after Unholy got all the bug fixes, unfortunately, it is now dwarfed by Unholy. They have pretty good single target damage, pretty good priority damage. Their AoE is always pretty good. They have great utility, especially if you need a grip for whatever reason. They can bring a grip to your comp. Pretty good mob control with things like Blinding Sleet. But it does fall into a similar bucket as Devastation Evoker. It's very cooldown dependent. Most of your damage is going to come within those cooldown windows. But I think Frost DK is a pretty strong performer right now. So yeah, minor buffs coming into 1205. Going to put them at the top end of B tier. Okay, up next we have our Fire Mage. So Fire Mage is in a very, very similar spot to Arcane Mage. Unfortunately, no changes for Fire going into 1205. Fire Mage is one of the specs that was actually stronger at the start of Midnight, and through several different nerfs has kind of been pushed down to the bottom of the tier list. Both Fire and Arcane, again, do not have the best defensives, and with all the damage nerfs that Fire Mage has gotten, especially in AoE, it's gonna put them somewhere. I'd put them in a similar bucket to like Arcane Mage. Both specs are really struggling at the moment. And you could even make a case that both of these go down to C tier, to be honest. Where you're gonna see Fire Mage being really strong is when you can run it with like a Priest, and Priest are not in the best spot at the moment either, because you typically PI on top of their combust window, get all that damage. But yeah, we'll just kind of stick them at the bottom of B tier. Not too much to say. Very similar to Arcane Mage. Kind of lacking in AoE damage, but their single target priority is pretty decent. Now, the other mage spec, Frost Mage, is actually in a pretty dang good spot right now. This is the most popular mage spec at the moment. So one of the best things that Frost has going for it is it's not really a huge cooldown reliant spec. Every single pull, you're going to pull pretty good damage. It's very consistent, and that just makes it an easier mage spec to play. It did receive some questionable changes to Glacial Spike, which now has a duration of 60 seconds. It was unlimited. So after 60 seconds, your Glacial Spike will expire. So the problem with this is basically you're going to have less pre-pull setup. And from my research on this, apparently your Frostbolt would turn to Glacial Spike, and people could not find Frostbolt in the spellbook. Not 100% sure how accurate that is. That's just what I read. So honestly, in Mythic Plus and Raid, it's not that bad of a change because you're chain pulling, right? Or you're just always in combat in Raid. But it does suck for world content. So it's not really going to affect their tier list ranking if you've been seeing that on Reddit or whatever. They did get some bug fixes and things like that. Nothing really major happened with Frostmage, though, in a Mythic Plus setting. Frostmage also has probably one of the best defensives in the game with access to Cold Snap, which sets the cooldown on your Ice Block and your Frost Barrier. And Frostmage is also pretty good because it provides all those slows with a Brewmaster Monk. A Brewmaster can kind of kite the mobs out with a Frostmage and let those stagger stacks kind of fall off while your Frostmage is just perma-slowing everything. So for its good damage profile, for its utility, for the lust that it brings, for its survivability, this gets placed in a tier probably above Balance and Ellie Shaman. Yeah, I think there is an argument to be made, though, for Balanced Druid being better, depending on your healer comp. But yeah, overall, Frostmage in a very good spot. Okay, up next we have Fury Warrior. So Fury Warrior got an overall buff. Rend is easier to spread now, so your Whirlwind will apply Rend to all targets if Rend is known. We got some buffs to a Blade Storm, a 20% damage buff, but you only get that damage buff through Unrelenting Onslaught. A few other minor AoE damage buffs, but overall, a good sign for Warriors. Warriors have kind of been forgotten about in past season expansions. It's nice to see both Fury Warrior and Arms in a decent spot. So Fury Warrior is not going to be quite as strong as Arms Warrior. I would probably put it in a similar place as something like a Frost DK. Probably a little bit stronger than a Frost DK, to be honest. We'll probably put it at the bottom of B tier. Maybe right above, probably like right above BM Hunter. Pretty average overall damage profile, decent single target, decent AoE. They bring their shouts, they bring their battle shout, they bring their rallying cry. The biggest issue with Fury is that Arms is just simply better right now. Yeah, competing for the exact same utility, for the exact same spot in the comp. And, most people are not really running a physical damage comp at the moment. But overall, I think their damage profile is completely fine. If you don't play Fury, go ahead. It's in a good spot. Okay, up next we have Marksmanship Hunter. Oh yeah, baby, this shit sucks. So Marksmanship Hunter received a major rework in 12.05. And it went the complete opposite direction, I think, of what people were wanting. They did add Explosive Shot back into the mix. And most of the things that I've seen with Hunter is it's not necessarily that the damage is all that bad. It's basically the same issue that Enhancement Shaman used to have. It's just there's so many procs and there's so many things happening with the spec that it's like almost impossible to plan a rotation. It's a very fast GCD environment. You're kind of guessing on the next button to press, and you're going to be punished if you do the wrong guess on the next button. And before, marksmanship was structured around aim shot windows. You'd spin precise strikes, repeat, right? There's a clear priority. And now the damage is tied to like lock and load and black arrow procs. There's a lot of overlap in the timing, and a lot of times you press aim shot and you have to pick, between arcane shot and a black arrow proc. But both of those can happen back to back. Both of those can overlap. So there's no clear, correct flow to the rotation. And it's even worse during high haste moments, like during Lust. There's just so much happening that it's just kind of hard to properly react to everything. So the gameplay of the spec is just bad. To be honest, people are pissed about it. I feel like MM is the one of the most changed specs in the game. I feel like every single season they make major changes to it. It's like the Holy Paladin of DPS. Just they just reworked the whole thing for no reason every single patch. So definitely some class design or spec design issues going on there. In my opinion, they should go back and lean more into the War Within style marksmanship. I think adding explosive shot back was good, but that doesn't really mean too much if the skill is just undertuned. And I think they should go back to how the 4-set was either in season 2 or 3. I want to say it's season 2 of the War Within with lock and load procs. Right, whenever you consume that lock and load proc, you would fire an explosive shot at 200% effectiveness. I can't remember what it was, but it was broken. It was super broken, but it was fun, and that's kind of the point here. So marksmanship falls to WTF tier. It's actually just what is going on with this? I'll stop ranting about it now. Lots of changes happened in 12.05, and it's not going into all that. So let's go ahead and move on now. Let's go into Havoc Demon Hunter. So Havoc started off pretty bad, and it's gotten buffs, and it's actually moved up quite a bit in the tier list. It didn't get buffs in 12.05, so sorry if I kind of hype you up there. but just throughout Midnight, it's just kind of slowly gotten buffs, and it has kind of worked its way up. So no changes, actually, for Havoc in 1205. I'm still going to be really strong since the magic comp kind of is meta right now, and they do bring that Chaos brand just like the Devourer Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter is on par with like Deathknight, I would say, in terms of survivability. One of the more durable specs, the more durable DPS specs in the game. You know, with their crazy mobility, a lot of their passive damage reduction, their high leech, etc., they're just generally tanky. Overall, they've stayed in pretty much the same spot as they have for the past couple of months now. They're going to be like low A tier, high B tier. Probably put them right over something like Fury Warrior, just because the extra utility that they bring. You know, it's going to have the same issue that a lot of these other specs have. There's just another DPS spec that competes with it that pushes it down, and unfortunately that is Devourer. I think they have a pretty good damage profile from AoE to single target. In a very good spot right now. I don't have too much really to say about Havoc. If you want to play it, fine. You'll be very successful with it, but Devourer is just outpacing it at the moment. And since there's no changes in 1205, there's not too much we can talk about here. So mid to low A tier. Okay, up next we have Outlaw. There are some changes with Ace Up Your Sleeve. Overall, it does proc less, but you do get more combo points when it does proc. So it's kind of a buff to burst and a little bit nerf to like sustain damage, I'd say. So Outlaw did receive, you know, pretty much every DPS spec did receive a big rework, but so did Outlaw. But you don't have to play around stealth or crack shot windows anymore. There's also a rework on Roll the Bones, so it's much less RNG based now. And surprisingly enough, this is one of the better DPS specs to play in the physical damage composition. So this will go up there with Feral Druid, Arms Warrior, and, you know, the third could be something like an Outlaw Rogue. You know, so this is going to be great with a Battle Shout. This comp's going to be great with the Brewmaster physical damage buff. Kind of one of the issues with Outlaws, it still does suffer from the 8 target cap through your Blade Flurry. So it does make it difficult when you go into really, really high keys and you're pulling really big. I think one of the ways that Blizzard needs to buff Rogue's utility is through their stops and their kicks. Rogue has no AoE stop. Pretty much every DPS spec has a single stop kick. They need more kicks, in my opinion, to be able to justify bringing one. I think that would kind of fit into their class fantasy, but overall, Shroud's just not cutting it. So, you know, with kicks being removed from healers, if you gave, you know, a few more kicks to something like a Rogue, you know, maybe people would bring them more in Iron Mythic Plus. But right now, Outlaw is the top performing Rogue spec in a really good spot right now, and no 1205 changes. Okay, getting down to the last few DPS specs, let's go ahead and talk about Retribution Paladin now. Oh, did we skip Shadow Priest? Okay, we'll just do Ret Pally. Dude, Ret Pally is probably okay, I take this back on what I said about Beast Mastery earlier. I said Beast Mastery is probably the easiest DPS spec to jump into Mythic Plus with. It's probably the second easiest behind Ret Paladin. So Ret Pally did receive some big single target nerfs a couple months ago. Unfortunately, no changes in 1205 for them. And Ret Pally is just going to be great to bring because of their utility in their group survival specifically, right? You got your bop, you've got your sack, you have your off healing, your lay on hands, your immunity. Not only that, you have a very short cooldown window. And pretty much every single pool, you can have your abilities ready to go, right? Your full cooldowns just ready to go every single pool. And for this reason, I think they are the kings up to low, mid, even the low end of high keys, because they just do everything great. They're just such an awesome spec, in my opinion. Ever since they got their major rework, they've just been top tier in my eyes. So we'll probably put them up there, you know, somewhere in here, maybe, probably. I guess it just depends on like what comp you're running, but it could be interchangeable with any of these four here. We'll just kind of put them like right in the middle. One of the better melee DPS options right now. So from Ret Pally's perspective, their single target is not as good as a lot of these other specs. Just kind of keep that in mind. They do great AoE, and they're kind of like the Frost Mage of melee. Super consistent, low cooldown windows. You're going to be pumping pretty much the entire dungeon. No changes in 1205, so let's go ahead and move on to Shadow Priest. So Shadow Priest has been undertuned for a large portion of Midnight. They did not get any changes in 1205, and where Shadow really shines is in their single target and then their funnel damage. Their AoE is pretty good, but their single target is normally pretty crazy. You know, very comparable to something like a Demonology Warlock. Probably not that high, but you kind of get my point. That's kind of their bread and butter. Obviously, their main utility is going to be through their power infusion. And typically when Fire Mage is really strong, you're going to see something like a Shadow Priest being really strong so that you can PI on top of their combustion windows. They bring good utility, right? They bring their Mass Dispel, their Mind Soothe. Their Powered Fortitude is really strong. Their Powered Fortitude is about 1 key's worth of survivability. And I think Shadow Priest has a talent to make their Powered Fortitude 10% more stamina on themselves and then 5% on the rest of the group. So it's actually even stronger through a talent on yourself. So Shadow Priest has been in a similar bucket to Marksmanship Hunter. Just tons of changes going out there, trying to figure out where Shadow Priest kind of fits in this current sort of meta of specs. They did have a couple big major changes with like how their dots are spread through the Tentacle Slam and whatnot. They're a lot easier and more simple and straightforward to play, just like all these other specs, right? So they got their fair share of button bloat pruning themselves. And Shadow Priest is going to be probably higher than you would expect after they've gotten all their tunings and whatnot. We're going to put them right up there, probably below something like an Elemental Shaman. So they're going to bring a decent amount of survivability through the healing that they provide, and then also the damage amp through PI, but less crowd control than something like a Frost Mage and something like a Balanced Druid. So probably not as good with something like a Brewmaster Monk that could really benefit from that extra CC. So, you know, that's kind of where we're putting Shadow Priest right now. Let's take a look at Sub Rogue next. So Sub Rogue did get some changes going into 1205. So Deathstalker's Mark and Shadow Strike get a buff. It's easier to stack. You get extra plague damage when actually spending combo points. Mark for Death got a buff, and then Cloud Cover through Trickster got a buff as well, adding sort of like a new stacking damage sort of amp window. Now Sub Rogue actually coming into Midnight received probably one of the biggest prunings across all of the DPS specs. It was effectively reduced down to like a 2-button rotation in AoE. They do have very short offensive cooldowns. They have good on-demand burst, kind of a similar bucket to something like a Ret Paladin. They did get some changes, unfortunately, a couple months ago. All that tuning that happened in March. Their AoE damage was nerfed, but their single target was buffed. And due to that nerf, unfortunately, they do fall below Assassination Rogue and, of course, Outlaw Rogue, which is the strongest of the 3, putting them into something like high B tier. Maybe low A tier. But if you're looking for a very simple rogue spec to play, I think Sub Rogue would be a good one to pick up. Okay, moving on now to Survival Hunter. So Survival Hunter is actually in a pretty good spot right now. They did actually get a nerf and then like a couple buffs in 1205. So Lunge has been updated, no longer grants Wildfire Bomb cooldown reduction, but it does grant 2% agility. And it's increased by an additional 2% while dual wielding. Shrapnel Bomb to get a buff now causes Wildfire Bomb to grant 15 additional focus over 3 seconds. Yeah, so if you choose to play Survival Hunter, most of your damage is going to come from probably Boomstick and Wildfire Bomb. You do pretty good AoE, you do pretty good single target, really good damage profile. And in my opinion, it really competes with BM. One of the issues with Survival at the moment is its loot pool has 2 different weapons. You got 2-hand and you got dual wield. So it can kind of be hard to get the specific weapons that you need to actually play it. On the plus side, the utility kit is a little bit more catered towards Mythic Plus rather than raiding. And, you know, just kind of a hunter issue in general. It's got 3 DPS specs, so you're always competing with 2 other specs, you know, to be meta. But, you know, it is a very unique spec. There's not many other specs in the game that play something like a Survival Hunter. Overall, long story short, it's in a good spot. If you like it better than BM, this is a perfect time, you know, to play one or the other. I wouldn't necessarily put one over the other here. I think technically most people are playing BM over Survival, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Survival is bad in any way. Up next, one that we have not talked about yet that is Giga OP right now is going to be Unholy DK, which is probably the top DPS in the game right now. So Unholy has made a huge change in 1205. It went from being not that good to really good. Right? There's so many bugs that were impacting the spec that it has just gone from like B to C to like Turbo S. So gonna be great, especially in something like Algathar or something like that, where there's a huge mob count. You can spread all your diseases out. Gonna be always just typically scales better than Frost in higher keys, right? You get higher target counts. You can just spread your disease more effectively. Where Frost a lot of the times is better in lower keys, right? Because there's not as many targets to spread your disease on. But Unholy does great in this specific comp, right? Because most of the damage is magical damage, and you're getting buffed by the Augmentation Evoker. You're also getting buffed by the Demon Hunter Chaos Brand. And it's just crazy the amount of damage that Unholy DK can pull off, while basically being supported by 2 other DPS specs. And then a Brewmaster Monk that can go and pull a ton of mobs and just kind of kite them around while they dwindle down from the Unholy diseases. If you're not aware, Unholy DK no longer has Festering Wound either that you have to play around. You kind of have smart diseases that spread around everywhere, and it's a lot easier to play, and I think that this is a great time to play Unholy DK in my opinion. It's rotationally good, it's visually fun to play, it's the strongest DPS spec in the game right now, and just scales incredibly well. Okay, then the last DPS spec that we're going to talk about here is Windwalker Monk. So Windwalker did receive some buffs as well here in 1205. Fist of Fury through the Crashing Fist proc, got 20% additional damage. They have like a better crit scaling system now through their Tiger Eye Brew. They have more CDR from spinning Crane Kick hits. Overall, it's pretty much overall driven by Fist of Fury damage increase and just sort of a better cooldown loop involved. So Windwalker is a great like movement spec. If you like to kind of be on the move, you never want downtime due to movement. You want something that just feels very fluid. I would recommend playing something like a Windwalker. Now, one of the things it has going against it is, of course, Brewmaster is the meta tank spec. So you're never really going to be bringing 2 monks, just not enough utility to justify it. Or really 2 of any spec for that matter, you're really not doubling up on. So that does kind of knock it down a little. Really good mob control, right? They got their Ring of Peace, Paralysis. They got their Mystic Touch. The issue that they have is they're kind of cooldown gated, and they kind of have like a burst profile, and they have kind of a higher skill floor than a lot of people are willing to put in the work to actually meet. Monks are not super easy to play. Any of the specs, Brewmaster, Mistweaver, they all take like an extra gear to play. One of the issues that Windwalker Monk has is they are target capped, like a lot of the other specs on this list, which means they just do not scale as well as a lot of these other specs. So I would probably put Windwalker up here, probably below Fury Warrior in the low A tier. They have a pretty decent damage profile, to be honest. I think they're really good in like mid to high keys, almost like a similar bucket to something like a Ret Pally. Obviously not as easy to play, but they have such strong bursts that they fit that key pool very, very well. So yeah, they did get some buffs in 1205, so they sit pretty happy in A tier. And yeah, I believe that's our last DPS spec to talk about here. Wow, that was a really long video. I'll be interested to see how long this video was when I put it into my video editing software. Nothing really made it into C tier, but there is an argument to be made. I'm sure some of the Arcane and Fire Mage players are like, why is this not C tier? I know there's a lot of people pissed off right now about Arcane Mage. So there is like this argument to be made as well. I just put them low B, but whatever. Pretty much the same thing. Probably the 3 worst DPS specs are going to be these 3. Marksman probably does more damage in these 3 specs, to be honest. But it just needs a complete overhaul. Okay, so yeah, I guess we kind of talked about the lower end. Let's talk about the upper end really quick as a recap. So your physical damage comp, you're going to be running these 3 specs more than likely. Your magical damage comp, you're going to be running these 3 specs more than likely, with a flex in your Demonology Warlock, just depending on what you guys need. And for your physical damage comp, of course, you could flex in something like a Retribution Paladin as well. Kind of fits into like a similar bucket as a flex pick like this Demonology Warlock is doing for the magical composition. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap up the video here. If you guys enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you guys in the next one.